I'm giving everybody a few seconds here to get themselves together, but I have a separate microphone and the bishop is ready for any questions or comments or anything that you would like to ask him. I just asked, we're going to pass this around. I think we're still running, aren't we, Kevin? Yeah, so we may even have some people from Zoom who want to speak a little bit. And then when Reverend Rios is available, we'll maybe ask questions of him as well. Harry, were you raising your hand? Oh, very good. Okay. So, Kathy, I'm going to give you the microphone. Thank you.
Oh, yes, you do.
Yeah, you do, because
we're helping people
on Zoom don't have microphones. It's not in a microphone.
All right. Bishop Mark, what are your plans after you retire from here?
Thanks, Kathy. So my last official day will be July 22nd, which is the Feast of St. Mary Magdalene, which is the day I was installed as bishop in 2006. Yes. What an amazing day that was. So beautiful. Bishop Curry was the preacher. He did an unforgettable sermon. As one of our clergy say, and it sounds bad when he starts, and he intends it that way. He says, Bishop Michael's sermons are all the same, but they're all better than ours. And they're not all the same. I've watched him develop his theology and his thinking over time, especially around creation care. He proclaimed in our cathedral about 7 years ago that he had come to understand that the family of God, which he used to think was the family of humans, was the family of all life. That was a big step, right, for us to think about it that way. Anyway, at my installation, he said, it was Mary Magdalene Day, and the conclusion of his sermon, which had many parts, was, all right, California, get in the wheelbarrow with Mary Magdalene on the tightrope going over the waterfall. That's where you need to be, in that kind of precarious, risky place with the saints. And I still remember it, and I think that's where we are. Sheila and Orion, our puppy, and all our worldly possessions will already be in Stanton, Virginia, which is a mountain town about 35 miles from Charlottesville on the Blue Ridge. And it's Washington, D.C. and Charlottesville are both at 400 feet above sea level, and Stanton is 1,400 feet above sea level. It's very near the Appalachian Trail, very near the Shenandoah National Park. There's a train station, an Amtrak station that can take you to D.C. That's where we'll be. And what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to be writing some more books. Some of you have read Brothers in the Beloved Community, The Friendship of Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King Jr., and that has been an amazing experience to learn about their friendship, learn about what it had to do with the beloved community, and there's been a marvelous response to that story. As Robert McDermott said to me when I started the research, Mark Ty, which is what his students called him, Thich Nhat Hanh, and Martin have given you their story. And your task is to tell it as well as you can. So I want to do more writing, and there's some climate work. I will be heading the delegation for the presiding bishop to the climate summit this year in Baku in Azerbaijan. Probably the last time I'll lead the delegation for the Episcopal Church, but I'm honored to do so. This will be year 10, since the Paris Accord when we started. And then we'll find some other things to do, gardening and being part of that community. We would welcome visits. Yeah, thanks for the question.
What are your plans?
Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else?
What do you see as the most important work
for the next bishop?
Oh, that is such a good question. Well, Bishop-elect Rios is a person of great depth, and I believe his commitments. Okay, I know a few things. He is a biracial, trilingual person who claimed his cultural and racial heritage at a very young age. And I think that our diocese has been growing in the areas of social, racial, and environmental justice, and we have a lot of growth yet to do. And I believe he will be an extraordinary leader in that area, in those areas. He is an answer to our collective prayer in that regard. He won't do it for us, but he will lead us. And I think that the movement we were able to make over these last 18 years, I wish it had been more. But you can't, as people have said to me, oh, well, the Holy Spirit's going to make this just happen. No, no, no. 400 years of people in Egypt died without seeing their hope fulfilled, the Hebrew people. 400 Black enslaved people, 400 years of enslaved people in this country died without seeing their hopes fulfilled. God does not break God's promises, but they come in God's time. And so I think there's a crest happening. We can see something emerging that hasn't emerged in this way in a long time. So I'm really hopeful. The work of the Bishop Pike, of whom I spoke, that whole hierarchical way of doing things, that church is gone. He was a great activist. Bishop Pike was at the March on Washington. Bishop Millard was marched in Selma, which is extraordinary, but it was under a framework where the church was more hierarchical than it is now. We are, as I call us, rhizomatic. Any gardeners in the group? So rhizomes, Sean remembers all this language. So rhizomes propagate this way. Irises are rhizomatic. Roots are hierarchical. Even if they're like redwood trees, there's a hierarchy of roots. You get bigger roots, tap roots, then you get, et cetera, down to hair roots. But rhizomes are like this. And so the church, I think, is more like that. That is, we are different. A bishop has a different role than a lay person, but it's not hierarchical, or not entirely. Okay, so I believe that he will also take all these areas of growth. He's been in the Europe scene, where this College for Congregational Development, which started in Olympia, around Seattle, has taken place. So our Vital and Thriving, which is a great gift to our congregations in our diocese, I believe under his leadership will deepen and grow. So it's not just about justice, it's also about the growth of communities. And I believe he will lead us in those areas as well. And, stuff I don't know.
Anybody else?
Yes. Oh, thank you for saying that. That's very kind. It's been such an honor to serve as your bishop for these many years. I was thinking about confirmands, all these people I confirmed in Alabama and then here in California, and I may still do this, write to the clergy, to Kathy, and ask them to distribute to the congregation if your child or you or your sibling or somebody in your family was confirmed by me, what has happened since then? Spiritually in your lives. Wouldn't that be interesting to see? There's thousands of people. And the little one person is in the ordination process, as Andrew is, who is the son of one of our rectors. So he was, I think, 5 when we moved here. He's now a deacon, will be a priest, God willing, in June. I mean, that's quite a journey. And I just wonder what that picture would look like to hear where have we been together in this way. Yeah, be interesting. What else? Anything about the wider church or our diocese or here, you and
Be bold, people.
Yep, yep. There's no bad questions.
yes.
Yeah, please. Help us out. Keep this conversation going.
Okay. Hello. I'm trying to formulate the words for this question. So it's kind of a two-parter. One is, what frustrations did you experience during your tenure in transitioning into the community or projects you were working on? And what lessons did you learn that might be able to reduce those frustrations in the future? Number one.
Oh, that was one.
Yeah, well, we'll start there. And then
A,
I have,
1A
I have
and B,
some,
okay.
I have some follow-up questions.
Okay. Oh, okay.
I'm going to stay back here just for her. So.
Yeah, I see. Jonathan Haidt, the social psychologist, has said that there are 5 innate moral positions within people. He doesn't mean hereditary, but he means that you find them in most people. And one of them is community consciousness. And there, his great example is Kerala in South India, where Ranjit Matthews, who's an Episcopal priest whose family comes from Kerala, that when he visits there, he says, you can feel community in the air. It's thick. The American South can be that way as well. The other end of that spectrum in his 5 areas is individualism, which is also a strength. And the 2 great examples he gives of that are, in his experience in the world, are New York and San Francisco. So we can say the Bay Area. So with individualism comes a lot of agency, willingness to put yourself forward, but it also is competitive. And it tends towards competition rather than collaboration and cooperation, community. So that has been just a reality, and with some frustrating aspects, to be honest. The idea, we did a survey when I first got here, when we were building the vision of the diocese, and when we asked congregations, how do they think about their Episcopal congregation neighbors? The overwhelming answer was, they're the competition. Not the friends, not the collaborators, not the network, not the beloved community, the competition. Well, that's not great. Could I put it that way? That's not great. In the area of racial and social justice, we are a very diverse diocese. So Sheila and I and Orion will be moving to a much less diverse part of the world. It's sort of black and white, literally African Americans, white, and a growing number of Latino, Latinas, but dominated by that. We are everything. We have hundreds of languages in the Diocese of California, literally, many, many racial identities, cultural identities, countries of origin. And yet, when it came to the work of beloved community, these white diocal did not show up again and again at those multicultural events, except for a very few people. It would be people like Sean McConnell, the bishop and staff, and a few people would show at these events. And it was also true that those groups would be the ones that would show up. So Asian Pacific folks would show up, but the Latino people would not show up, and the blacks would not show up. This I have seen for 18 years. It hasn't changed much. So that's reality, but at a certain point, it felt like frustration to me. What was the B part of that one?
What lessons have you learned that you can help to, oh, so sorry.
Yeah, I think there's probably better, I'm not sure the answer to that. I think there's probably better bridge building that could have been done than I was able to do. So I think that is probably the case. Not for want of trying and for want of looking for creative resources, but I have to believe it could have been better. So these 4 months, Bishop Rios will be consecrated as a coadjutor, which means that we serve next to each other for just a very short time. It could be 3 years. And in the old days, like when I was, it could have been unlimited. I think up to 6 years or something crazy. In one case, a coadjutor died before he could become the diocesan bishop. That much time had passed. Ours is a very short time, but my intent of that is to give him all the support I can give him in that time. So introducing him to people, to structures, to institutions, to congregations, in ways that he will know more than before he was elected. And hopefully that will equip him to have a good beginning. We've also just called the new canon for racial, social, and environmental justice, the very Reverend Canon Eric Matoye. And he will be a new part of the staff working with Bishop Rios. Yeah.
Can I just say, it has been a joy to work with Bishop Marc. We just spent a week at the House of Bishops together, and I heard horror story after horror story of coadjutor relationships.
I'm going to make you have this.
And it's been such a gift to be able to experience the goodness that Bishop Marc has to offer and the expertise. And I'm very thankful for the way in which this relationship is benefiting not only us, but also the larger diocese. If you don't have a good transition, it can be wasted time. And I feel very thankful for Bishop Marc's willingness to engage in this coadjutorship in such a positive way. It's been a huge gift to my life.
Yeah. It's a real gift to me as well. He's a lot of fun as well. He got me to my first Warriors game in all these years.
Yeah.
How about that?
It was pretty fun.
It was really fun.
First
Yes, another
Warriors
first.
game. So Bishop Marc, I've got a question. So you see lots of congregations, both within your diocese and elsewhere. If you were going to list 3 things that the more successful ones do that the less successful ones do, what would come to mind?
Well, I'll leave what the less successful ones do aside.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
not sure about that. I think accountability and transparency are together very big pieces. I was a young priest when Namibia got its new constitution. And I was listening to public radio, and a public radio reporter was interviewing a member of the cabinet in Namibia, and the reporter said, "What is special about your constitution?" And she said, the answer was, "We have built transparency into the Constitution." And the reporter says, "Well, what does that mean?" And the minister said, "It means that every branch of government in an orderly way will make its workings transparent to the other branches of government and to the general public without being forced to do so by the courts."
Nice.
So they'll open it up so that we can be seen. Okay?
Yeah.
So that is kind of a version of the light from the gospel today. So those two to go together. The other piece is love. So the beloved community, I've been talking about it for 18 years.
You have.
And if you're sick of it, then you're not taking it seriously enough.
Okay.
The beloved community is what Josiah Royce took from the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God and translated it into the phrase beloved community. And there's a whole reason he did that. But it's based on the idea that Martin Luther King Jr. famously talked often about, which is the interrelated structure of reality, or interconnectedness. Now, interconnectedness is neutral. It just means we're connected. It's not a good thing or a bad thing. It can be a very bad thing. In other words, collective action for bad is very powerful. It amplifies my energy by however many join me. Mm-hmm. So we've seen this in authoritarian parties, totalitarian parties, fascist parties. On the other hand, if this overflowing love is overlaying these connections between us, then that creates the beloved community. So the transparency and the accountability, when you add the element of love, becomes the beloved community. And I think this is the way to succeed in business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is to live like that. So the other thing I would say is spiritual practices. We are not coming to this work to fill pews, to balance budgets. Those are secondary to what we are here for. And Anna Devere Smith, the actress, some of you know who she is. She was having lunch with Sheila and me once, and she said, "You should get Stanford to have a divinity school, because all the great Ivies on the East Coast all have divinity schools." That's not true. Penn does not, deliberately. But I thought that was an interesting idea, because let's take Harvard. They've had a divinity school for a very, very long time. William & Mary has had a divinity school for a long time. If you didn't have 400 years of accretion about how to do this, how would you train people for ordination if you were starting fresh? What an interesting idea. And so I took this seriously, and I thought, well, I would start with spiritual practice. So the person comes into the community and they do some experimenting and find their spiritual practice and just deepen that and live in community for a year before they start the academic side. Because the academic is just laid on top of how we are in our souls, in our hearts. I think that's true for our congregations. The first thing that we should think about is, how do we live as a spiritual community together in love? So what does that look like? It could be your food pantry, but how is that a spiritual practice? We could ask that question. How does that show itself as not just the transactions I was talking about in this sermon? Even social services can be a transaction. Handing out food, receiving food, it's over. But what about taking it to the light and it becomes something more? And what would that look like? So could be centering prayer here. It could be you have a Taizé service. You could have Celtic spirituality. You've got Francis. What does Franciscan spirituality look like here? What would that look like if maybe you do this? There are two great spiritual paths in the history of Christianity. One is the denial of images, and one is the affirmation of images. We mostly hear the denial of images, so that's contemplative prayer. So I sit quietly, and I try to get rid of all the images, right? So I start thinking about things, and I use a word to bring me back to an imageless, quiet contemplation of God. That's what most of us know as the spiritual path. There is the affirmation of images as well, and the Franciscan path is one of those two great paths. Ignatian spirituality is the other one. So what does that mean? Well, it means Let's take the Anglo-Catholic movement in the Episcopal Church. This stuff, vestments, that stuff, stained glass windows, this stuff, the smells that you love so much. No, I'm allergic to those. Anyway, all of that was a deliberate thing from sort of 1820 forward in England and then here in order to engage the senses and wake us up to the presence of God in all things. So in the catechism, in preparation for confirmation or baptism, one of the questions, we go through the sacraments. So there's Eucharist and baptism, and then there's sacramental acts like marriage and burial and unction and so on. And then it says something like, are the sacraments of God limited to these? And it says, no. These are to train us to see that everything material is capable of conveying the divine to us. So our task is to learn to see the divine in all things, especially people that we find so difficult. They are our gifts, bearers of the divine to us. So what would a Franciscan spirituality look like here? Well, it could be a gardening group, looking at the beauty of nature. It could be a dog walking group. I think there's potential for that here.
Doggy daycare, perhaps, yeah.
Doggy daycare.
Or Sunday doggy daycare, I don't know.
When you need it most, yeah. You see what I mean? So that would be really interesting to ask that kind of question. Yeah.
Awesome.
Only because I don't think there'll be a more propitious moment to mention it, but the Namibian national flag was actually designed by 1965 Novato High School graduate Don Stevenson.
Wow. Well, thank you. There's no more propitious thing I could have heard. That's wonderful. That's great.
You have part two.
Well, I do. So you have answered a few of my questions, but in the vein
Well,
of
thankfully.
So in the vein of spirituality, I know currently something that a lot of religions are experiencing is that there is a transition from religious belief to spirituality,
Yes.
and an external community that are existing. And I know Grace Cathedral is really incredible with the programs that they're providing for community building and for those outside of the religious sect. I also know that there are several programs that are being worked on, such as a collaboration with programs such as MAPS to develop community and intersection of belief and, again, seeing the beauty and the divine outside of in everyday life and living. So what kind of programs are you seeing or relationships are you seeing or would like to speak to about the external development or development of programs outside of the church?
Wonderful question. So more and more people are filling out census forms and other kinds of polls by saying, as we've heard so much, spiritual but not religious. And what I've noticed about that is that people in religions, in our church, let's just stay with our church, see that as like an opportunity to bring those people in to us. And we rarely ask the question of the people, well, what is your spirituality? What is your existing spirituality? Not, oh, you're ripe for being an Episcopalian, but what are you already doing? So I've been trying to practice that for a number of years, and in answer to your question, it's bewildering how diverse it is. These may be very, very particular practices that have been birthed by the person themselves, not part of a tradition. I can give you an example. I lead an Epiphany retreat at the ranch, usually around the day of the Epiphany, January the 6th. And I asked this question years ago, And an elderly woman said, "This is my spiritual practice. Every autumn, I take a walk in the morning past a pond, and next to the pond is a beautiful tree." And I think it was a sugar maple, or it's a maple of some sort. And she looked on the ground every day of the fall and found the most beautiful leaf that had fallen from the tree and took it home. And she had a plate that was from her grandmother from the 19th century, a beautiful plate, and she would put the leaf of the day onto that plate until all the leaves had fallen from the tree. Then she would keep this in her kitchen until the spring, and they had dried up and the colors had gone, and then she would go to her rose garden and put those leaves as the humus for the next life. Isn't that beautiful? And she just totally made it up. Well, what's out there, right? If we would ask the question, and then I think the question for me as a church person is, how can I support that? What is what we're doing here consonant with that or supportive of that? And how could we help you grow your spiritual practice instead of just come do what we do? So if you are interested in, sort of interfaith answers to that, that's a very lively space right now. And I was invited to be a presenter in Costa Rica at a conference called The Dawn of Interspirituality. This was about 8 years ago. And interspirituality is not the same as interfaith, I came to understand. Interfaith is, we could say, defined faiths relating to each other. Interspirituality is the space between those faiths. And it's learning to live in that space between the religions. And I think there's more and more of that going on, so that it's not a Buddhist talking with a Christian, it's a Christian and a Buddhist finding a spiritual space that they can inhabit together. Neither abandoning their own faith, but finding this space that they can inhabit together. So.
Only because the spirituality issue has been mentioned. At all times, I'll make this as brief as is possible for me to do. At all times mentioned here, Dr. Paul J. Steinhardt's role was holding the Albert Einstein Chair in Physics at Princeton. In the 1970s, the Big Bang Theory became very unstable for mathematical reasons that I won't attempt to describe here, but it was well understood that there were serious problems mathematically with Big Bang. These were resolved in large part by the work of Dr. Guth at Stanford in 1982 with his publication of what's called inflation with a capital I in astrophysics cosmology, which essentially takes the position that the universe went from its tiny speck to an inflated sphere instantaneously, and thereafter the equations all fit. And that patch called inflation is the key to modern astrophysics cosmology, without which the Big Bang would quite collapse. So Dr. Steinhardt met with Guth at Stanford, as it was a coincidental visit, I think, in 1982, and became a co-advocate of inflation as the resolving characteristic for Big Bang in cosmology. But then in 2004, approximate, Dr. Steinhardt published his absolute mathematical disproof of the possibility of inflation. This had a lot of consequence for me because I don't think I'll try to take you into my own personal story there. But I just would say that those that have often rather pompously stated that science has proved that there is no God, et cetera, ad nauseum, are not actually in tune with the science.
I really appreciate that. You know that one of my teachers was Brian Swim, the mathematical cosmologist, and I imagine you know him and his work. He's a Bay Area person like you.
Did we have another question? Yeah, Vigili.
Yes, so given all these individualities you have mentioned, how is it that we as a parish, as a diocese, as the global Episcopal Church, come to and into the body of Christ as one, as a community? Thank you.
Well, that is not an easy question because it's countercultural for this area, right? And indeed, the Holy Episcopal Church functions congregationally, even though our polity is of the whole. So, so how do you get past the functionality of that? The very simplest thing I could say is to show up. Literally show up in person. So that would be for you, perhaps, deanery. Now, the deanery is not a popular thing, especially with the clergy. But it's not about popularity, it's about showing up. And I think when we show up together, we're connected, if you will, etherically. We're connected whether we're in the room together or not. But there's a palpable difference for most of us in terms of perception when we inhabit a kind of intimate space together. Something happens where we feel the connection. Now, some people can do this, really remotely. They feel the oneness of life. They feel the connection between people, even when they're very, very distant from each other. And with certain people, almost all of us are that way. People we really, really love, our children, our parents, our lovers. But for most of us, for most relationships, we kind of need to be in the room together. And I would say we can become a diocese by showing up together. So in Marin, but more than Marin, there is a kind of isolation about Marin, may I say, that what? That could, that could keep you from the rest of the diocese, and then from you. So that's the main thing. We will discover that we are more connected than not connected when we show up and are in space together. So diocesan events that are at the cathedral exists for that purpose. I mean, we could say some other purposes, but it's really to be a container for our common life together. So it'll make a difference.
At the risk of pontificating, because I have a microphone, and I was mentioning to Reverend Rios this, one of my favorite aspects of the Episcopal faith is this concept of staying in conversation.
Yeah.
And showing up,
Yes.
continuing to engage,
Yes.
staying in conversation, even with the person that you most disagree with.
Yes.
Eventually you're going to find some points of connection, some points of interface. Any other questions?
I think there was.
Okay, we've got one more. I think we'll do one more, and then we're going to feed this crowd because I got a room full of food over here, and nobody to eat it yet. So here you go.
Final question. As we sit in St. Francis and all of the work that you have done for environmentalism, what are some of the things that you are excited about with the diocese at an international level for the health of the earth and the community at large?
Well, this diocese has been really a leader in the area of climate change and environment, creation care. There are individual efforts that really are worth remembering. Holy Hikes was born here, and that's a beautiful thing. Honore Farm and Mill was born in this diocese, where organic wheat is planted and milled and is the basis of a lot of our communion bread in the Diocese of California. It's a really beautiful kind of path of sustainability that you can see. The solar project that we undertook about 12 years ago, we wanted to put solar on every church building, but we did a survey, which was useful, and they aren't all suitable. But we got over 40 churches and institutions with solar on them in that time. Sally Bingham started Interfaith Power and Light in this diocese, and she's the canon for creation care at Grace Cathedral. I could go on. So there's a lot of efforts. We have never had a successful diocesan environment commission. It's back to that individualism stuff. I think there's a need for it. And that I'd love to see develop. On the international scale, and it's also local, I get the Apple News feed, every morning, and 6 years ago, I was privileged to be allowed to brief Speaker Pelosi about the Episcopal Church's policies on environment. And, she's a very prepared person. She knows. So everything I was saying, she was just nodding. It was like, this is well known to her. Until I got to the climate migration statistics and projections. So by 2050, it's possible there will be 500 million climate refugees in the world. Well, right now, there's an article in the Apple News feed from last night. The city of Denver, which is a sanctuary city, the way Oakland is, the way San Francisco is being overwhelmed because Greg Abbott and Texas are moving migrants who come into Texas to the main city that's receiving them is Denver. And they want them. They want them. They've spent, I think it's $12 million supporting migrants since Abbott started sending them there. But their systems are being overwhelmed. And when I got to that number, Speaker Pelosi said, "Did you say 500 million?" And I said, yes, and I really want to underline that because Europe is struggling, the United States is struggling, ideologically, spiritually, infrastructure, economics, with the numbers we have now. So multiply that, and we have a crisis that we don't even have a way to talk about. I want to say that to you because I think our churches have to be, the climate crisis is a spiritual crisis. Let me repeat that. The climate crisis is essentially a spiritual crisis. It's how we see the earth. It's how we see the life of the earth. We have to change that. And what we have to do is become sanctuary communities and a sanctuary diocese for the life of all species, but also specifically for people who are being uprooted from their homes internally in the United States and coming from the south of the border, and it will be coming from the north as well. This is going to be it's a global problem. And so we know that Guatemala, the origin of much of the migration there, underneath the violence, has been drought and famine that comes from climate change. The war in Syria, an article in the journal Nature, which is one of the most respected science journals, traced that internal conflict to a climate event, a drought and a famine. This is going to increase. So I say that because it's San Francisco and the Bay Area is one place that is really going to come home. It's going to be everywhere, but it's really going to come home in our diocese. The 1.5 degree Celsius ceiling that was set as the goal for Paris, we have breached it already, essentially. People are still using it. It's not a real goal anymore. When it was set, a group of the Pacific Island nations literally raised their hands and they said, do we know that 1.5 is a safe level? So 2 was what we could achieve, right? Is 1.5 safe? And the IPCC, the international body of scientists that serves the climate summits, went and looked, and they said that 0.5 degrees above the pre-industrial level of warming will be untold suffering, even at that level. Last year, we breached it. We will breach it again. It's no longer a realistic number. We must see what the IPCC report said in 2018. This has got to be our watchword. Every fraction of a degree, every action that we take matters. We have to commit ourselves to what is called the long emergency. So when people say that it's like a war, it's like we have to rally like World War II, that is incorrect. That's a 5-year effort, and then we went back to where we were before. This is a commitment that will go beyond our lifetime. And that's different. We've never done this before. I will end with the most hopeful thing I know. Karen O'Brien, who's a social scientist working in Oslo, says that the decade from 2020 through 2030, this is the window, right, for climate action, is the most possible field for human action in the history of humanity. We've never been able to make such impact as we can make in this decade. And we still have 7 years to make a difference. So as Bishop-elect Rios has heard me be saying, I am calling, that's the window. They keep saying the window is closing. The window is half open, not half closed. The window is half open. So Diocese of California, a lot of smart people, a lot of people who care, soulful people, you can make more difference than many people can make. And just have in your mind, the window is half open. And we've got 7 years to make the difference that will save unimaginable suffering in the world. So thank you for the question. Thank you for all the attention. Thank you for the honor of serving you for these 18 years.
Thank you, Bishop Marc.
So I have 2 questions. I know we just finished, but the first is, can we pass the mic around for everyone to offer one word of either thanks or intention for this next chapter? I think that would be helpful. And the second question is, can we gather in front of the doors for a group picture?
We can do that.
So one word. I'm going to give it to Bishop Marc to start, and then you can pass it out like Bishop Buck.
Guess. Love.
I guess intention, pulling off of where you ended, hope.
Grace.
Love conquers all.
Love and peace.
Hope.
Faith.
Music.
Great.
Gratitude.
Patience.
Trust and understanding.
Peace.
Peace and love.
Authentic connectedness.
Oh, thank you.
I have to say it too. Peace and love.
Action. Hope.
Compassion.
Perseverance.
Satyagraha.
Stewardship of our environment.
Celebration.
Generosity.
Faithful.
Revolution.
Thriving.
Intention and willingness.
Collaboration and communication.
And I think I got everybody. I'm going to say conversation.
That's great. Wonderful.
Thank you all. So Rosie's room is directly behind this building
Do you want
across
to do
the
the
square.
picture?
Oh, picture, then Rosie's room. There we go. Okay.